Welcome to the Automotive Hall of Fame. We're here in Dearborn, Michigan. I'm Brian Baker, the VP of Education and Principal Historian. Today we're going to share the story of the electric automobile or electric vehicles, not only the beginnings, but all the way into the future. And I'm standing here next to a wonderful piece of history shared with us by our friends at the Henry Ford. This is an 1889 prototype built by the Baker Electric Car Company for Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison's personal car that he tested his nickel iron battery at the turn of the century with. We're lucky enough to have actually the salesman's display sample here that shows the cells and the case that it came in when Thomas Edison was selling the idea of electric automobiles to all the automakers. This Baker prototype that he has here has a place for the battery in the back, 3 wheels easily steered from the tiller. We'll talk a little bit more about it and more as we take you through the history of the electric automobile and how it's recharged for the future. We want to start by thanking our dear friends Lawrence P. and Maria Elena Fisher for their support, as well as BD and JE McIntyre for their foundation, and our friends at the Motor Cities National Heritage Area. Thank you to them for their financial support, and thank you to you for attending today. Electric vehicle history begins long before Thomas Edison, but Edison's a major player because of his invention of the light bulb in 1879. On display here at the Hall of Fame, we do have this prototype that I shared with you a moment ago, and it's a treasured piece of our history. We're going to talk about the future. The future of the electric automobile begins with its past. When we talk about where we are today, I like to start with this quote. I really do encourage other manufacturers to bring electric cars to market. It's part of a sustainable transport future. I wish it was going faster. None other than our friend Elon Musk says that one. We'll talk more about Elon a little bit later. But for now, let's get back to Thomas Edison and his personal Baker electric prototype. Edison realized the potential of electric cars early on and decided to research the nickel iron battery as a means to improve over the previous lead batteries, which had a very short life. Edison commented in 1903 on the future of the automobile. He said, electricity is going to be the thing. That's the way to go. Here's why. There's not that terrifying, uncertain throb and whir of the powerful internal combustion engine. There's no whirring or grinding of gears, and there's no circulating water system to cool it off. That could complex things. There's no dangerous or evil smelling gasoline odor, and most notably, no noise. Edison thought all of these factors were enough to make the electric automobile the obvious choice 120 years ago. But 170 years ago, in the 1830s, 190 years ago now, Robert Anderson in Scotland created the first modern electric. He basically took a carriage and found a way to get some batteries to power a motor and turn the vehicle. But it sort of went still for a long time. The next step forward was in 1884. Thomas Parker is known as the Edison of Europe, a compliment to both gentlemen. That's Thomas in the middle, looking very dapper. And this was his electric that he created in 1884. Now, there's no time to talk about every car, but I want to hit on a few for you, the major ones as we go through the years. In 1888, over in Germany, Andreas Flocken created the Electro Wagon. Here again, you see the carriage history of it. It looks like you could put a horse in front of it right away. But Thomas Edison began experimenting with batteries in 1889. And that's the reason he went to the Baker Automobile or Baker Vehicle Company down in Cleveland, Ohio, and he had them build this car for him. The back end is an open, basically a laboratory where he could place his various experiments of his batteries. And in 1895, this is what was going on in Philadelphia. Again, another carriage type solution. In 1898, in New York City, this was the best way to get around town. With all of the horses and all the other noise that was going on, this electric provided you the seating position of a king, if you will. Seated in the front, you don't have to look at the back end of a horse, and you can see the driver is perched up behind you, up high, where he can see upcoming obstacles. That's the 1898 handsome electric Brom. You can see where the battery box is. These vehicles were designed to travel around the metropolitan New York area, where they had 5 locations. If the driver felt that the car was starting to slow down, he could simply drive the vehicle to the nearest battery station and swap out the battery box for it. This is what they loved about this car. People could sit like Abraham Lincoln in his favorite chair here at the Lincoln Memorial. But the handsome taxi company in New York was headed up by a Mr. Wilson, who was a former Secretary of the Navy and pretty much a self-admitted spinster, playboy type. He started with 13 of these cabs, these taxis, and built it to 200, and was doing very, very well. So well, in fact, he ordered 1,600 of them that he was going to cover all the cities, major cities of the East Coast with taxi cabs. But he made the mistake of not maintaining his fleet of batteries very, very well. And one story in the New York Times doomed the electric automobile for approximately 100 years. It said that electric vehicles are unreliable. And people realized, yeah, some people were getting stranded, midway through their journey because the batteries weren't in good shape. So because of that one moment in history, we delayed our advancement of the electric automobile for many, many years. Let's talk about that. At the turn of the century, the first vehicle to go 100 kilometers per hour was done in France. Camille Janazzi created this Comet, as he called it. And remember, this is at a time shortly after Halley's Comet had appeared. So the choice of the name Comet is not surprising. Here's Janil behind the wheel of his Comet after breaking the record. There were lots of choices for people who wanted electric vehicles. In 1900, 38% of registered cars in the US were electrics. That's more than steam, which was second, and third was internal combustion, the standard still today, at 22%. So there were lots of electrics being manufactured. Range was always an issue. Reliability was always an issue. But why was the world ripe for the electric automobile at this time? Well, in 1900, the #1 pollution problem was not the factories. It was this: 1 million pounds of horse poo on the streets of New York City every day. There were teams of men who spent the whole day just shoveling and getting rid of it. People were anxious for anything that could get rid of this problem. And the electric car was a natural. The internal combustion car had this problem: cranking. It required a person to get out in front of the vehicle and hand crank to get it to start until 1912, when Cadillac introduced the electric starter. Thomas Edison patented a nickel iron battery in 1903, which had a lot more durability and longevity than the previous lead acid battery. Here's the actual patent drawing in the side there. This is what his early batteries looked like. They weren't beautiful, but they did the job. And Edison decided this is the way to go. So he began promoting it. These are all different car companies that use the Edison battery. Tom wanted to corner the market and created his battery company, which still has a vestige of it today in the Exide Corporation. Edison himself owned several electric automobiles and promoted them all shamelessly. He was a celebrity. Remember, he was the man who gave us the electric light bulb, the phonograph, the movies. So everyone was proud to have Tom Edison pose with their product. This is a 1905 wood electric, which I think is beautifully restored, perhaps beyond what it looked like in 1905. Maybe I'm wrong, but I love the way it's photographed in the middle of the woods here as well. Now, our friends at General Electric caught on to this and started advertising that you could have a charging station at your home for your electric car. And wisely, they had a female demonstrating how it charged, because a lot of the primary customers of these early electrics were women. Companies like Studebaker, which had been around since 1850 as a carriage manufacturer, and one of the few companies that successfully transitioned to the modern automobile, as you can see from their ad on the left, offer both an electric and a gasoline engine version of their cars. Now, the one on the right, which is a Studebaker electric ad, goes through, who are our customers? Well, businessmen, professionals, and women. And the bottom of the ad does have just a little hedge of the bet. Gasoline models are also available if you wish. Now, at a dinner in 1909, Thomas Edison was seated near Henry Ford. They were friends. Remember, Henry Ford had gone to work for Thomas Edison as a young man at one of his power plants. And Thomas Edison scratched a note out to Henry saying, "I think the electric car is dead." Internal combustion. Remember, this is just 1 year after Henry Ford had introduced the Model T and started building millions of them in the years ahead. In spite of that, Ford and Edison started collaborating to create an electric car themselves. Ford handling the manufacturing side and Edison figuring out the battery and motor side of it. This is a photo of the prototype they built in 1913. They began in 1913. By 1914, Henry Ford was talking to the media about how within a year he was going to introduce the Edison Ford Electric. Well, meanwhile, the most successful electric car was being built in Detroit, the Detroit Electric. Here's a great shot of the front and rear battery compartments tilted open. And as you can see, the electricity would flow out of the house into recharging those batteries. These were really elegant automobiles, and they appealed to some pretty sophisticated people like Tom Edison. This is him with his car, and Mrs. Henry Ford. Yes, Clara did not drive a Ford because she didn't want to be reliant on anyone to have to crank start the car for her. She liked being able to just slip behind the wheel, flip the switch, and go, much like a modern golf cart. But let's talk about the electric for just a second. These Detroit Electrics had curved glass. They had furniture-like qualities to the woodwork inside. They had flower vases and other things to make the experience very, very nice. Other debutantes, the Vanderbilts and Carnegies, often were seen driving Detroit Electrics all the way up into the 1930s. Here's Jay, another electric car owner with his Detroit Electric that reportedly he's hot-rodded a bit. So I don't know how far he took it, but we're pleased to see Jay in an electric. The U.S. cities did not standardize electric current till 1910. Now, what does this mean? Well, if you bought a fan in Boston in 1909 and plugged it in the wall, it would spin at a certain speed. If you took the same fan to Chicago, plugged it in there, it would spin at a different speed depending on how much voltage the power company was providing to your house. Consequently, problems like this, traffic jams, see this cluster of cars in the middle and all that, they're all jammed up because there's no traffic signals. Well, in 1914, this gentleman, Garrett Morgan, solved that problem with the first electric traffic lights. There had been signals created before that had red and green panels painted, that would flip and switch. As you can see, this was controlled by a policeman in the intersection, but using electricity extended the day and into the early evening hours for motorists and kept the cars organized better. Garrett Morgan, one of our great inventors of the 20th century. Now let's talk about the middle years. This vision of this utopian world I love in this photo, showing cars buzzing around, driving themselves. How did we get there? Well, after World War II, the Japanese had most of their industry decimated by bombing and such, so they had to turn to electrics because they were easier to reconstruct. You didn't have to have all the exotic forging materials, this cast iron blocks and such. So they started making cars like this Tamiya electric car in '47, which came in a variety of body styles. In the States, this nickel silver battery company was supporting this unnamed sports car with as a way to get everybody into electrics. The Henny Kilowatt was a Peugeot body, a French body, engineered, if you will, engines removed, and an electric automobile put into it. This came along in 1959. They built 100 of them, but only 47 of them sold. Gasoline was plentiful. It was, pennies to buy. This one fell short, but it was an admirable attempt to take a credible vehicle and turn it into an electric. By 1960, here's the electric shopper from Long Beach, California. Look at the fins on that thing. What a great idea. Probably would be very popular in gated communities today. This is the electric shopper from 1960. Now, in 1966, General Motors controlled more than half of the auto market in the United States. And their research laboratories were basically given free rein to explore anything they wished. And they've had practically an unlimited budget. So someone said, well, let's do an electric. They took their cargo van and they made the Electro Van. This is basically a fuel cell vehicle. It's electric. It's got that hydrogen tank in the middle, which gives me some pause, but it's pretty well protected there in the middle. But this vehicle really worked and is still on display at the General Motors Heritage Center here in Detroit. 1967, back to Scotland, where the electric car had begun 150 years earlier, roughly. The first lithium batteries, the batteries that power most of our phones and other items that we live with every day now, was going to power this vehicle with 150 mile per hour range. It never got past the concept stage. Here's the styling model. Again, an idea of a modern microcar with an electric battery was on the horizon. Now, in 1971, NASA decided to take cars to the moon. Yes, we Americans love our cars so much. The first thing we decided to take to the moon after ourselves were cars. They needed to design those cars, and one of the men involved with that was a gentleman named Norman James. Norman helped create the lunar rover. There's 4 examples. They're still on the moon today. But before he did that car, he was at General Motors Design, working for Harley Earl. And Harley Earl came to the design studio one day in the late 50s and said, gentlemen, the space race has begun. I want you to design the vehicle that the astronauts will drive out to the launching pad. Norman did this beautiful CAN-SON rendering of his vision of a flying, floating, levitating car, if you will, inspired by the Nike missile, which had these dihedral fins on it. You can see them off to the upper and lower. That led to the design of this car, the Firebird 3, which was the sensation of the 1959 Motorama, a car capable of driving itself. You could also drive it from either the passenger seat or the driver's seat. It has 9 fins, a record, I believe, for an automobile. But Norman had been doing cars like this before he got inspired to go to help NASA get the first car onto the moon. He spent the rest of his life in support of NASA and building telescopes and optics. Thank you, Norman. In 1972, BMW needed to help out the Munich Olympic Games. And so they took their new model, the 2002, which we talked about in the last lecture, and converted it to an electric so that it could lead the endurance and distance runners at the Olympic Games without putting off any fumes for them to inhale, thus BMW's first electric car. In 1974, AM General, which was a subsidiary of AMC, created 350 electric conversions for the U.S. Postal Service that had a 33-mile range, which served them pretty well, but not enough to convert them all. 1976, this is the Vanguard City Car. This wedge-shaped car with the obvious nod to early impact bumpers on the front was an attempt to make a practical use of electrics. Let's talk about the modern era. For me, the modern era really begins in 1990 because in the design studios, designers were sketching things like this. This is out of the GM design studios, and it led to this show car, the GM Impact, Probably not the best choice of names for a show car, but or any car for that matter, but the impact was important. A great designer named Mark Caskey helped create this style. And Mark did not only this car, he helped the team that led to the EV1, the first production electric car from General Motors. Here's a beautiful cutaway by David Kimball showing the internals of this car. Let's talk about the EV1. In 96, they showed it, but there really wasn't a 96. It wasn't until 97 that the EV1 was available as a lease only. General Motors did not sell the cars. They only leased them out. Modern, clean, minimalist interior with a joystick that you would be able to control everything from in the front. It even was equipped with airbags. Handsome car. As with many cars, whenever we try to envision the future, it seems designers tend to cover the wheels. Everybody's thinking about those flying cars like Norm James did. You know, EV1 available for several years before General Motors decided to bring them all back in. And because of the concerns over the high voltage and other things that could be dangerous to the general public if they worked on their own cars, as Americans tend to do, they decided to crush those cars. Now, a few have survived in museums and schools across the country for students, and there's rumor, according to our friend Gary, who attended this lecture, that there's one that still runs out at the GM Proving Grounds. Let's hope so. But this story, what killed the electric car? First, in the form of a documentary, and then I think it was a cable TV movie, kind of pointed the accusatory finger at GM, and that's wrong. Simply, if you research it, the legal implications of this car were such, and GM wasn't giving up on electric cars, but people were afraid that they were. 1997, Toyota picked up the mantle with the Prius, which has evolved into this car, the 2020 Prius Hybrid, which is a combination of internal combustion and electric motors. GM introduced this concept in '01. The next level in pure electrics was the skateboard concept. This 11-inch thick platform contained everything you needed to go forward into a car except a steering wheel. And the idea was you plug different bodies on top of this skateboard. The first one they did was called the Avatar. The Autonomy. The Autonomy vehicle was a two-seater, slim, natural, easy to fit over the body of this. The very next year, they came out with the high wire concept. I love this photograph because you can see right through the front end of the car. The fact that there's no engine up there at all. That's the sunlight shining on the floor inside the high wire concept. Then Chevy came out with the Volt in '07, first as a concept, and we were excited. Here's a great looking electric car that is the future. From any angle, this car was pretty darned attractive. It had proportions, it had long wheelbase, but unfortunately, when you adapted it from concept to production, it got a little frumpier. Still a nice car, great car, a loyal following, and in production until recently. The Chevy Volt evolved to this, the most recent version of the car. Now, what if I wanted to go fast? Well, electrics can do that for you. Mercedes-Benz, as a test, did the SLS AMG edition, and they made this even faster than the 12-cylinder model that was the internal combustion offering. This had 4 motors in it. Elon Musk takes the Lotus Roadster and starts making the first Tesla Roadsters. Here's early examples. They're going up in value as collectibles, but they weren't terribly refined yet. Elon has done a lot more with his modern stuff like the Model X here. And BMW has gotten into one of their examples, from sports cars to others, the i3, as they're getting very serious about doing more and more electrics. Google did its autonomous electric, which begs the question, if you don't own it, will you really care what it looks like? It's a serious question that, as ride sharing and other opportunities are part of our future, will people care what car they get into? Here's Kia's latest concept for an electric, the POP concept. And over in Plymouth, Michigan, Rivian, which is majorly invested into by Ford Motor Company and Amazon, having ordered 100,000 of these electric vehicles from Rivian, are banking on that future, which it's actually fairly conventional from a pickup truck design standpoint if you overlook those vertical headlights. The headlights are a great distinguishing feature of it, but a lot of promise coming from the Rivian plans. And over GM, they're reviving the Hummer brand shortly with the electric Hummer, taking their most conspicuous consumption vehicle, the Hummer, and turning it into a very earth-friendly electric. Now, we've had wedge-shaped concept vehicles for many, many years. Here's the Navajo concept from Bertone from 1974. And later in the decade, Giugiaro styled the original DeLorean, and here it is in 1982, Back to the Future version. But were we ready for a stainless steel Cybertruck? Well, Elon Musk thinks so, and he debuted this vehicle. Knowing the work of Franz von Holhausen, his chief designer, it would seem this is a strong left turn for their design group. But we now know that Elon solicited input from his passionate followers. Over 3,000 ideas were sent to him for what a futuristic pickup truck could look like. And boy, does it look wild. The sheer forms, the stainless steel body is actually quite a functional truck. If you look at how it opens up, and even how the electric motors allow it to kneel in the back end, and the tailgate extends down, creating a ramp. I have some very traditional truck friends who are excited about this truck, and they are among the 650,000 who've already put deposits on them. I think it works great as a camping vehicle here. So that's one to watch. The Cybertruck is going to look really, really wild on our streets. And that it is an indication of how different you can design cars. Now, there's another element of electric cars we can't overlook, and that is this grassroots movement. Years ago, Neil Young, yes, that Neil Young, the great performer, musician, decided to take his Lincoln and have it converted to an all-electric vehicle. And he's one of the most outspoken advocates for electric vehicles today. Electric trucking. Well, here's a great quote. I like this one. I believe that ultimately electric motors will be universal for use in trucks and the average family automobile. Guess who said that one? Thomas Edison in 1914. The man was a visionary, no question about it. So let's talk about the future of electric vehicles. I'm fortunate to be an instructor at the College for Creative Studies, and one of the people that influenced me in my career was this gentleman, Charles Chuck Jordan. Chuck is a member of the Hall of Fame and has been since the year 2000. Chuck had this comment he always liked to use: prediction about the future is a perilous business, especially when it involves the future. That being said, as a disclaimer, let's talk about the future. This is a concept I did for a client of mine for a modular mobile vehicle that could be used for everything from passenger ride hailing to delivery of goods. And you can expand it and contract it to different lengths. And on the highways, it might even look something like this, driving itself without any driver, autonomously between cities. That's a sense of the kind of thinking that designers are putting into it. And as I mentioned, the College for Creative Studies here in Detroit is one of the places in the world where designers are trained to create vehicles of the future. And they are creating some wild ideas. Look at the shapes. They're unlike anything we've seen in automotive before. Some of them look like cabanas for shelter, like the one in the bottom left. Some look like capsules. Some of them look like roast beef on wheels. Cool ideas for the future. Some of the predictions that I think are natural: the lower operational costs of battery electrics are going to lead to a lot of use of them. As we figure out the weight challenges, obviously even levitation and flying cars, if you will, are a possibility because of the drone technology we've developed. And governments around the world are obviously going to de-incentive gas-powered vehicles, not just the raising of prices, but they're going to try and push the electric vehicle for many, many reasons. OEMs, or the original equipment manufacturers, are going to continue to improve their image by making cars that improve the air quality all around us. So the electric vehicle obviously has a very, very bright future. We're excited about it here at the Hall of Fame. We're monitoring it. We're watching the developments just as you are, and looking at the pioneers of the next age of electric vehicles. So again, we want to thank Lawrence P. and Maria Elena Fisher for their support, as well as the McIntyre Foundation and the Motor Cities National Heritage, and mostly you for attending today's lecture. Thanks for watching.